So if you've been watching my channel, you probably already know that I have a thing for older Macs. I've featured quite a few of them already. But it's not just older Macs I'm into, I just like older computers in general, although some specific brands and models hold a special place in my heart. And no, it's not just Apple, but funnily enough, Apple's arch nemesis for the longest time, IBM. Yeah, I've gotten quite a few ThinkPads over the years, as you can see, and I don't really know why, but there's something about them, perhaps how they're quite the exact opposite of Apple's design philosophy. I mean, look at them. They're like slabs of black, blocky plastic with sharp corners and a design that screams work and business. They don't really look like a ton of fun, and they all kind of just look alike. This stack has many different models from IBM and Lenovo, spanning quite a few years, but they're almost indistinguishable from the outside. But if you go back even further to the late 90s, IBM's flagship notebooks used to be even blockier, chunkier, and thicker. It's time to introduce you to the 300 line of ThinkPads. Oh yeah. In particular, this is the 385 model, a successor to the popular 380 line of systems. And good God, I mean, this is something else. It is the thickest and heaviest notebook I own. It's around 6 centimeters thick, or around 2.36 inches, which is pretty wild, even when compared to the slightly newer early 2000s models. In fact, you can almost stack two of them, and they're just barely thicker than this bastard. It's also very heavy, with some of these early Pentium models reaching almost 7.5 pounds or around 3.5 kilos. Just imagine lugging this thing in your backpack to school. No wonder your parents have back problems. Jesus. However, compared to the very early portables and especially luggables of the 80s, this thing must have seemed like a pretty freaking lightweight and compact option. Now in the thumbnail I have shown 3 different laptops, and yeah, that's not really a fair comparison because these ones are like 10 years newer and a different class of notebooks all around, but it's still amusing to see how far we've progressed as far as notebook design and compactness goes. You can stack 3 modern laptops and get a stack which is thinner and lighter than this beast. Pretty wild. Even when compared to its contemporaries, this thing impresses in the way of size and girth. This is a compact Armada from a similar time period, and you can see it's not only a bit thinner, but it's much more modern looking with more rounded edges and ergonomic design. And this thing even has a built-in power supply, unlike the ThinkPad. So as per usual, I got this thing at an auction for around 30 bucks, which nowadays is a bargain considering these earlier ThinkPads have hit the collector's market and people are apparently paying up the ass to get their hands on them. And I don't really know why. I mean, I certainly wouldn't pay that kind of money for a machine like this. I've gotten most of the laptops from my pile for free or just for a couple of bucks, but as I've said in a couple of my videos already, collector's market really is strange. Anyway, I've gotten this particular one from a seller I've bought things from before, but they sell most of their stock in unknown condition, so it's always a bit of a gamble, but I had good luck and positive experience in the past. So the first thing to do was just to try to turn it on and to see what it does. I've plugged in my backup universal charger I use with most laptops I get in. And lo and behold, the thing whirled to life. It started beeping, the screen came on, it registered 16 megabytes of RAM, which was the standard memory configuration of this class of products, and 161 and 163 error, which is extremely common for these ThinkPads, and fortunately usually pretty easy to rectify. It just means that the clock CMOS battery had died and needs to be replaced, and we will certainly be attending to that, but you can just usually enter whatever date and time you want and proceed with the boot sequence. And since I haven't inspected this machine before, I had no idea whether it had a hard drive or not, or an installation of Windows or what, so I was blown away to see that this thing was booting to Windows 98. And if you have any experience with computer hardware, I mean, you know how often you run across a dead hard drive that's just a couple of years old, so I was pretty stoked that this thing had a working, nearly 30-year-old hard drive inside. And after a couple of seconds, I was greeted by a nice Windows 98 login screen. And I remember the first time I came across a computer with a password-protected installation of Win98, and I was trying to figure out how to get in without the password. And yeah, if you didn't know, you can just press escape, and it will override the login sequence. Great. So everything up until this point seemed to be working just fine, and whenever that happens with such an old computer that came out of nowhere, I just feel like I won the lottery. And it gives me a chance to take part in something that's quite special to me, and that's exploring this ancient installation and to see what this machine did in its past life. Just looking around, I could see that this hard drive, which seemed to be around 1.5 gigs in size, didn't have too much stuff loaded on it. It seemed to be pretty clean, just a couple of folders, mostly empty, and a couple of user-installed programs, and that's it. But even that small amount of files present on the hard drive made me chuckle, because by looking at them, I could tell this belonged to a child or a teen at one point, and I could see that they were last using this thing around 2007, which is pretty normal. I mean, I have no issues using 10-year-old computers today, but I can't imagine this kid had a great experience using a Pentium 1 machine with 16 megs of RAM in 2007. Anyway, the reason I thought this belonged to a child was because it had some simple games I remember playing as a kid. I mean, not these exact ones, but these types of games, you know. There was a game called Pop-'em, which is a Candy Crush style game, and looking at this intro screen, it's time to talk about some not so great features of this ThinkPad. Yeah, that smeary, ugly-looking ghosting effect you see around everything that moves. Yeah, that's the result of this thing having a DSTN panel, a dual scan LCD, which was a lower quality budget option in the mid to late 90s when these things were popular. And yeah, these screens have several problems. I have run into some that had dying segments, some were starting to delaminate, but even if they do work perfectly, like this one for the most part, they have very poor viewing angles, backlight issues, and things that are in motion just tend to disappear. Fun fact, that is the reason why on older versions of Windows, if you go to the mouse options, you will find that you can enable mouse trails. As a kid, I always thought it was like a fun gimmick, and I had lots of fun with it, but no, it actually serves an important function on piece of crap panels like this, as it helps you keep track of the pointer. Without the mouse trails enabled, you're very likely to just lose the pointer on the screen. Anyway, this popping game is a good example of the kind of game you might have a decent experience with on a screen like this, since there are not too many fast-moving objects. But I've also found this breakout clone, which confused the hell out of me because it's pretty much unplayable on a screen like this. I mean, look, how the heck are you supposed to keep track of the ball? There were some other charming things I found on the hard drive, and they made me chuckle, but if you're not from here, yeah, this is probably not going to make any sense to you. Looking around this thing and testing it out, I saw no need to reinstall the operating system. Apart from this one looking relatively fresh, with these old computers you never know what's going to go wrong, so I really don't like pushing it. My policy has always been, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The hard drive in this thing could die any minute during the reinstallation of the operating system for all I know, and the CD drive might also die in the process. Speaking of the CD drive, that's what I wanted to test out next, and what better thing to test out than a game? I thought about what game I could run on here, and I don't have too many original titles that will run on 16 megs of RAM, but I do have StarCraft, of course. Now I know this game will run on this configuration because I remember running it on similar systems back in the day, but this particular release is a later one from 2001, so I wasn't sure whether or not it would want to install. So I've popped it in and I waited. It took quite a while for that CD drive to read the disk, and it made some interesting sounds. But in the end, the installation menu did pop up. I've proceeded to go through with it, and I got stuck at a point where I had to choose the destination drive, since it would take up 1.2 gigs of space, which this machine unfortunately didn't have. I've looked around and I've managed to find an earlier release, and I've used my modern computer to burn a copy, which I've tried loading in the disk drive, but it just wouldn't read it. I thought something might have gone wrong with this particular disk, so I made another copy, but got the same result. Well, what we have here is an early CD-ROM drive which has issues reading disks that are burned on higher speeds like 24x, which my Apple SuperDrive does. For that reason, I've specifically turned down the settings in Toast Titanium to the lowest 1x. However, the lowest it would go in the actual session was 6x, which was apparently too fast. So I've put my old 2006 Mac Pro to use, and I tried using it to burn a copy of StarCraft, and luckily the drive that was in that machine went down to 4x speed, which fortunately was slow enough for this ThinkPad CD-ROM drive, and upon popping the game in, it finally read it. And I've proceeded to successfully install and play the game. But it did become apparent to me that the disk drive in this thing was definitely losing its mojo slowly, since it would stutter when loading in new video assets, as well as in other areas. The game just didn't run very smoothly, but it did run, which was reassuring, and it looked decent enough even on this STN LCD, which is barely suitable enough for a strategy game like this. I've also taken this opportunity to plug an external mouse in the one PS2 port in the back, and I went with an area-appropriate compact ball mouse. But no matter what, this is simply not a very capable Windows 98 gaming system. Just given the hardware restrictions, it didn't make sense to me to torture this guy with graphic-intensive loads. But something that I knew this thing would have no issues running whatsoever, and the reason why these machines are probably fetching hundreds of dollars on eBay is that these things are pretty capable at running DOS games. And yeah, most DOS games have pretty low system requirements. I mean, most early 90s games will run on a 386 or a 486 with like 640k of RAM, so this thing is more than well equipped to blast through hundreds of DOS classics. And I mean, the main limiting factor is going to be that awful screen. I mean, for fast-paced platformers like Jazz Jackrabbit here, it's pretty much a no-go. It's just not a very pleasant experience because of how fast Jazz flies through the levels. Also, all those nice colors seem very washed out, and if you have a darker game like Quake for example, yeah, you're not going to have a good time with it either. As far as the performance goes, it's pretty awesome in my opinion. Even more advanced games like Duke Nukem 3D run exceptionally well. And one other thing people are attracted to in these older machines is the sound chip. Even though you can run these games on your hardware under Windows 98, you're probably not going to have much luck with sound because those machines tend not to support the older AdLib and Sound Blaster standards, so you'll either have no music or it won't really sound how it should. This ThinkPad 385 has a Cirrus Logic audio chip which does have pretty decent Sound Blaster emulation. I also wanted to try out the floppy drive, and I was very happy to hear this thing running fine and reading the disk fine. Prince of Persia is one of those games that looks alright on this screen, even though it's still super nerve-wracking. And I do have a solution for the video portion of the equation, even though there's not really much we can do about it LCD, other than swapping it out for a TFT panel, but there's not really much point in doing that as far as I'm concerned. See, these guys almost always had a handy VGA or sometimes even S-video out you could use to pipe the video to an external screen. And I just used this cheap Samsung LCD from the early 2000s, which fits the job well, especially with its aspect ratio. And as you can see, we get a nice proper video output, no ghosting, nice contrast and vivid colors, and on a bigger screen too. So all these issues we had before are pretty much gone, and even though this is not as convenient as just having a proper laptop screen, to be honest, even if you had a TFT panel, it's going to be 11 or 12 inches, and it's not going to be as good as an external monitor. And hey, it's still more convenient than setting up a desktop system, since you have a computer, keyboard, and a trackpad. Well, a track point built in. And man, I almost forgot about that keyboard, which is in my opinion really a highlight of this laptop. It feels wonderful to type on, and if you were one of those hipster types, I guess you'd have a wonderful time typing out a movie script at a Starbucks on this thing. With all the fun I was having, I almost forgot to do the one upgrade I meant to do at the beginning, and that's to change out the clock battery. This gives us a chance to gloss over the bottom of this thing, which is fairly unremarkable, apart from these two ports down here, which are for connecting a dock or a port replicator. So if you weren't happy with how bulky your machine was in its stock form, yeah, you could slap this thing on and I guess get a hernia. You can also see that my unit is missing a battery, which is fine, it's not like I need one. Anyway, down here we'll find a single screw holding down this expansion door cover, which houses a single RAM expansion slot, which is empty at the moment, as well as a CR1220 3-volt lithium coin cell battery. I have already removed the old one, and I have this new one in this child-safe packaging, and it's one of those annoying blister-style packs, which I would have thought they've outlawed these years ago because you can't get in without using a knife or scissors. Holy crap, that's annoying, but I've managed to get it out and install it in the holder. With the new battery, the system no longer reports the errors and boots straight into Windows. Awesome. And I suppose the last thing to do is to give this thing a nice little wipe down using our friend the microfiber cloth and my alcohol solution. People ask me what it is, and it's just distilled water, isopropyl alcohol, little vinegar, and a bit of detergent. It does a good job of cleaning and disinfecting these old laptops I work on, and it removes that musty smell some of them have after being stored for years or decades in a damp basement or somewhere. And it really wasn't dirty at all. It's in overall great cosmetic condition, apart from the fact that somebody had removed the stickers and the labels from it. Some of these ThinkPads have a soft coating that tends to degrade over the years. It gets gooey and sticky, but this one fortunately doesn't suffer from that issue, and it cleaned up rather nicely. The last thing I did was I took out the little red nipple and I gave it a good scrub before putting it back in. You can actually get replacements for that, but I didn't have one handy. And yeah, that pretty much covers what I wanted to show you with this little machine. It's quite an interesting relic from a time when laptops were quite a bit different, at least as far as the form factor goes. And like I've said, it's a good reminder of how far we came as far as having lightweight, thin notebooks you can take with you wherever you go and not have to worry about, breaking your spine. And I do hope you enjoyed taking a look at it with me today. And if you have, you might enjoy watching some of my other videos about older computers like this. I do videos every week about all sorts of old hardware. I do retrospectives, reviews, repairs, and all sorts of other things. If you'd like to support what I do, you can join my Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or more if you'd like. And if you'd like to chat with me and other members, you can join our Discord server. All the links will be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!